The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
G'day everyone, it's Karl Thomson here from StorageCraft. I work as a sales engineer across Australia and New Zealand. Today we're doing a webinar on our VirtualBoot technology. So what I'd like to do is start by just covering off a little bit about the Shadow Protect solution. And this is important because Shadow Protect is a great backup product, but really what we're offering is a disaster recovery solution. So it's important that you are architecting your network or your infrastructure in a way that you can leverage this ultra fast recovery solution. So just to sort of step back for a few minutes as we go through this, we'll just sort of outline the scenario of what we're trying to achieve and then go through a bit of a in-depth overview of VirtualBoot, and then I'll go and do a demonstration at the end. If anyone's got any questions, please feel free to ask them during the webinar in the questions section. I won't actually review that until the end, but I'll make sure that there's time to go through those questions. I can re-demonstrate or explain anything in as much detail as required. So please use the questions or take notes as we go along, and then at the end we'll have plenty of time to go through and discuss that. So the first thing is understanding the problem that we're trying to address with disaster recovery. Now, I like to start with this by looking at some statistics to understand what are the causes of unplanned downtime, where do we need to recover and how often and why, etc. So statistically, 80% of the time, you've got application operational errors. This is where ransomware type scenario would fit in. You've then got 20% natural disaster, hardware, operating system, security, or power. In fact, just 3% would be a natural disaster, so fire, flood, earthquake, etc. So that means 97% of the time, you're going to want the ability to rapidly recover back on site. You're not going to want to fail over one VM in the cloud or off site somewhere, because you'd have to network that back to your primary production, and then at some point you'd want to revert that back. So, ideally, you're going to want to recover rapidly back to where the machine came from far more frequently than actually having to fail over entirely off-site. So looking at some of these things, some of these stats have come from North America. 85% of critical systems aren't backed up. So that was a recent study which was, quite alarming. Data growth rates are doubling every 2 years now versus every 4 years. So this is obviously a challenge, and probably why a lot of systems potentially aren't being backed up, because it takes too long. That causes impact. So Shadow Protect can address that very well. The next alarming thing is up to 40% of backup restores fail. So if we consider that, based on that top statistic, only 15% of critical systems are backed up, and now we're saying up to 40% of them, the restores are failing. That's alarming too. So testing is important, and this is where VirtualBoot really comes into that place. So we'll talk about that. Ransomware losses last year exceeded $1 billion, so it's a huge problem. Again, this is why we need the ability to rapidly recover. 247 new ransomware families in 2016 alone, compared to just 29 for the previous year. So it's a 752% increase. This is only getting worse. We need to be prepared. And obviously, as a disaster recovery solution, this would be your last line of defense. So obviously, everything we're doing is pivoting on the ability that we want to be able to recover. So that starts with getting frequent and reliable backups. Obviously, as partners, we need to be able to centrally manage this and monitor. We need to replicate off-site to protect those backups. We need to be able to recover on-site or off-site. And then we need support across physical, virtual, and in the cloud. So StorageCraft's got a fantastic solution. We're always working on improving and offering newer capabilities, and some of that you're going to see today. And then when we go and look at actually how you're going to leverage VirtualBoot, this is important, right? You've got your production, physical, and virtual environments. You've got Shadow Protect running, performing its ultra fast, near zero impact backups throughout the day by default every hour. Some critical machines as frequent as every 15 minutes. So you're going to back up to some form of storage. Now I've got the word here, BDR appliance. This is any sort of physical Windows box that you may want to use. It might be an old server, it might be a Windows storage server, but this is going to hold your backup images. Now, this could be a NAS, it could be a drive in an existing server, but some of the benefits of having a dedicated backup server is that we can install our included image manager software and isolate it on this box. This box could be off the domain. We could really lock it down to ensure that ransomware is unlikely to infect those backups. I actually did a webinar yesterday on protecting yourself from ransomware. So that's available on our YouTube channel. I'll point that out a bit later. That's also really relevant in that space there. But one of the key things is obviously VirtualBoot. In the event, particularly if it was a small site, it was only had one host or a couple of machines, if something went wrong, you might not have the capacity to recover back there, but having a backup server means if something fails, we could temporarily recover on that backup server. So that temporary recover would leverage either HyperV or Oracle VirtualBox, where we can just rapidly or instantly virtualize that backup into a temporary machine, or we can actually VirtualBoot directly back into production. So if I'm running HyperV or VMware environments, we've got the ability to virtualize straight back. So if one VM experiences some sort of event, I'll power it off in production, and I'll just VirtualBoot the backup from 15 minutes, half an hour, 45 minutes, an hour prior, straight back. And with VirtualBoot, it's booting directly off the backup image. So within minutes, we can have that machine starting to boot. So very quick way to recover. Because VirtualBoot's read-only off the image chain, what that means is that gives us time to then go and archive the old backups, free up that space, and actually migrate the rest of the data back into production. So really smart way. But again, if you're building Shadow Protect as a backup product, then, and you're backing up to a USB drive or to a NAS, you're severely restricting the functionalities such as VirtualBoot. We also have another technology called Headstart Restore. This can sometimes be used instead of VirtualBoot for customers that want to pre-stage to a spare SAN, but otherwise people would use Headstart Restore to go from a temporary VirtualBoot back into production. So while I'm running on a temporary BDR, my backups continue to run. Headstart Restore will pre-stage those backups when you're ready back into VMware or HyperV environments, allowing me to cut over from VirtualBoot back into production with minimal disruption. Then obviously comes replication. We need to replicate a copy of the backups off-site. VirtualBoot, Headstart Restore, and Image Manager are all included functions you can run at your own remote site for recovery, or we also have the StorageCraft cloud services. So in the event of something going wrong, you've got the capability to rapidly recover anywhere off-site that suits your preference. So, the key thing is don't just think about backups, think about disaster recovery. That's the solution you're needing to recover quickly. It's all about how you're going to design and leverage these included technologies in the environment that you're building. Licensing wise, really all you need to do is license the Shadow Protect software. So whether you buy bundles of virtual per VMs or physical servers, we have a socket-based license model. We have monthly rental for our managed service providers. We've also got a subscription option where you might just pay for a year, etc. So we've got a lot of licensing options around the machines you want to protect. The VirtualBoot, the Headstart Restore, the offsite replication options are all included. We do have additional services around our cloud infrastructure option as well. So some of the key things with the solution is the consistent sector-based backups. The Shadow Protect includes its own VSS provider, getting us consistent backups at a very small sector level rather than the block level. So we're getting very small compressed backups. We're able to back up every 15 minutes because of the in-guest snapshotting, which means we don't have any sort of stun or disruption to the VM. So that gives us reliable, frequent backups. We can then, leveraging VirtualBoot, recover servers in minutes. Physical and virtual support. The image management is very powerful with our built-in consolidation and verification at both ends, including on-site and off-site, and then centralized management with our included shadow control. So we'll go through a bit of this in the demonstration today. Now let's just focus on VirtualBoot. That's the key thing in the webinar today. So VirtualBoot technology has been around for a long time in various versions of Shadow Protect 4, 5, and then all the way through to the most recent versions of our SPX software. Has the ability to rapidly boot backup images directly into virtual machines. Hypervisors supported a VMware vSphere, Microsoft HyperV, and Oracle VirtualBox. And there's a lot of use cases which we're going to go through in a bit more detail, but some of these will be testing and verifying backups, system recovery, and system migration, and it's included for free with every SPX license. We don't need additional licensing. We don't need any licensing on that backup server either. So one of the options with VirtualBoot is to rapidly virtualize into Oracle VirtualBox. So if you've got a Windows PC or even a Linux PC that doesn't have obviously Linux one isn't running Hyper-V or vSphere, you can install Oracle VirtualBox. You know, it could be a Windows 7 or Windows 8 PC. It could be a Windows storage server that can't support Hyper-V. VirtualBox is a free hypervisor. You install it onto the operating system, and we'll leverage that to rapidly virtualize. Now, the cool thing with the Shadow Protect software is we don't care where the backup came from. It could have been a physical server, could have been running a VMware, Hyper-V, Citrix Xen, Linux KVM. We support a whole raft of different hypervisors. As part of the virtual boot, we will sort out the drivers and ensure Windows starts booting straight away. VirtualBoot supports Hyper-V. So the current release of SPX 652 supports Server 2012 R2. That's been supported for about 2 years. So it goes right back, I can't remember, probably SPX 6.1 point something. Supported Hyper-V 2012 R2. SPX 6.7 is currently in release candidate. You're welcome to reach out to us and we can provide you with a copy of that to trial. That now supports Windows 10 and Server 2016. So the ability to instantly virtualize any Shadow Protect backup directly back into your production Hyper-V environment, or the BDR could be a Windows 10 PC with Hyper-V enabled. So that's really cool. We expected to have released this software released by the end of the month, so the end of September. And you know, the benefit here over VirtualBox is we can leverage our existing investment in Hyper-V in our production environment. We don't have to, provision a complete backup and DR server with all that compute. We just need to focus more on the storage. Using a Windows server is always good to get true native SMB3 is going to give us the best performance. Or it might be one of your existing Hyper-V servers has, got a RAID of large SATA disks that perhaps hold your backups, and that becomes your local VirtualBoot server, for example. So there's a lot of different scenarios you're leveraging Hyper-V. And then more recently, actually this came out last year, is the ability to VirtualBoot into vSphere. So this gives you instant recovery. This solution is slightly different in that it performs a permanent and seamless migration directly into ESXi. We're leveraging some cool patent technology, and it's developed in collaboration with VMware vSphere's IO filtering program. It's been highly certified as VMware ready application software, and again, leveraging your existing VMware environments. You don't have to, go and build a separate backup server if that not part of your requirement. So with vSphere, again, we can instantly virtualize backup images regardless of where the original servers came from. We'll sort out the drivers. The vSphere VirtualBoot can also facilitate a complete migration, so P2V migrations. Access data is only a single hop away. So this is a really powerful part that really differentiates our solution, is that VMware talks directly to our backup image. We don't route them through a separate management VM or backup server. It's direct over SMB to the backup image, and therefore you don't have to have the backup and DR appliance or secondary conversion process. So we're getting better performance. The vSphere is compatible with ESXi 6.0 update 2 or newer, and that's in collaboration with vSphere. Running in that environment. That was released with Shadow Protect SPX 6.3. Again, when SPX 6.7 comes out at the end of the month, it'll include better support for vSphere 6.5, which is the most recent release that they have there. So, there's some scenarios where the current release of SPX isn't as compatible with the newer version of vSphere, so that is ironed out in 6.7, and there is a free plugin that facilitates that process. So how the vSphere one works, just to look at this, because we've won some pretty cool awards. As I mentioned, there is a StorageCraft IO Filter that sits within the vSphere framework. It talks directly to the backup image. As it virtualizes, it is writing into the data store. So it's read-only from the backup image, it writes into the data store, and that's what gives us a lot of performance. And this IO filter can initiate a transparent backfill, which is really cool. So this, as I mentioned, it's won the Data Protection Best of VMworld in 2016. So we're up against 145 different backup vendors, and StorageCraft have the best integration. And the VMware Ready is a I've mentioned is the highest level endorsement. So it's, we're really proud of the solution. It's a significant step forward in that recovery space for us. So some of the scenarios where you're going to use VirtualBoot: testing backups. As I mentioned, up to 40% of backup restores are failing. So within Image Manager 7 or newer, you have the ability to do what's called advanced verification. That will currently leverage either HyperV or Oracle VirtualBox to either daily, weekly, or monthly boot your backup image, your most recent one based on the time. It'll take a screenshot and email it to you to show you, hey, we've booted up your server. You should be expecting to see the login screen. That's an automated way to test. But obviously, not only doing that, you should be doing your own exercises with your engineers to make sure that everyone's familiar with the process, so that in the event of a DR, you are familiar with virtual booting, understanding what type of networking you want to deal with, and that kind of thing. So testing is really important to do that regularly. Temporary system failover, obviously the HyperV and Oracle VirtualBox ability to rapidly recover to enable business continuity, and then plan the migration back into production as a secondary time. So this is a big, obviously the whole point of testing is to allow for the system failover. Software testing in a virtual sandbox. This is a really good function with VirtualBoot. So I used to work for a reseller, and at least probably, I think it was about once a quarter, we had a third-party company that would come into a particular customer and upgrade a particular database. It was their line of business application. And just about every time they had a problem, it had taken a couple of hours to sort it out and fix it, and the customer would end up being down for over half a day, every time that they did this, and it was quite disruptive. So what we did was they said, look, next time you guys do this, there's no worries. What we're going to do is we're going to virtual boot into a temporary sandpit network while production's still running in parallel. It has no impact, and you guys go and do your update there. If it's all good, we'll destroy that. You make note of anything you have to fix up, and then after hours we'll schedule some time and you can go and do that change in production. But sandboxing is it's fantastic because it's getting you a real copy of that server from your last backup, instantly virtualizing that. You can isolate it, you can bring up a bunch of different servers and isolate them in that sandpit, do some form of testing, or again testing your DR plan, testing updates, all that kind of stuff, the risks that involve. You can test that during the day, and then at night time when you go and roll it out after hours, it's going to be a straightforward process. So that's really important. Historical data access. Some people want to virtual boot a backup from a year ago, 2 years ago, and open up a program and look at something that perhaps since been deleted or whatever. So very easy for that type of scenario. And then obviously with the vSphere one, we've got the completely integrated and seamless migration. So, a lot of benefits there leveraging vSphere, which we'll take a look at in a demonstration. So yeah, really cool. I think let's jump in and look at a demo. So again, guys, if you've got any questions, please ask them, and I'll come back and review them. But first, we'll just take a quick look at a demo. I've got 10 minutes left, so we might need to go a little bit over time for the questions. But let's just go into this machine. I've got a HyperV virtual machine running here, so I'm just going to take control of that. Now what I want to do a bit of a live demo, I don't want there to be any smoke and mirrors, is we're going to copy a whole bunch of stuff on the desktop, and I'll label it with the date and time. So this here is just over 8,500 files. What Shadow Protect's doing in the background in the low-level kernel is it's quietly tracking sectors in real time. So this has no impact to the environment, to the end user. Shadow Protect silently tracks. What that means is when we go and kick off a backup, it already knows what's changed. It doesn't have to interrogate the file system. It just has to perform its VSS consistency across any VSS-aware applications. So this is what enables us to do very fast backups. Because it's at a sector level capturing the changes, we effectively have a complete image of the system every time we do a backup. It's just got the smarts to leverage a continuous chain, so we don't have to keep doing full backups all the time. So we'll call this webinar Sydney time. It's 11:20 a.m. So we'll follow that file around. Now I'll open up the Shadow Protect console. You don't have to install the console. You can now just install the agent only and manage it remotely from other computers on the network or via our Shadow Control. This particular backup job that I've got here is a Shadow Control policy. So this needs to be executed or managed entirely from Shadow Control. So just jumping into Shadow Control quickly, what I'm going to do is go into the server and ask it to do a backup right now. So I've just clicked Run Job now. We'll minimize that. I can see that job's running. SPX is doing a quick check of the backup chain. It's then going to initiate its snapshot, which is the VSS processing. This is where it'll talk to Exchange, SharePoint, SQL, Active Directory, get a consistent snapshot of all volumes, deal with your databases and that type of process. Once that's done, it will then write all of that data, the 8,500 files, off into a backup image. So I can see that whole job's just finished, and it took just 26 seconds. So in fact, that was even quicker than it took me to copy those files there in the first place. And the longest part wasn't writing the data into the image. It was actually just performing the VSS snapshot. So I can see there that is incremental 1,737. So I'm just going to make a note of that. That's the backup that we want to recover there, the C drive, incremental 1737. So let's just shut down SPX. Obviously, I've got the ability from that timeline to do a file and folder restore within seconds. But let's say I jump in the server, it's the middle of the day, and I do a software update, and then all of a sudden I get a blue screen. Look, my backups, my high availability is no good because my server is just blue screened. I can't now go... my high availability, the problem's replicated across SANs. I need to go back to that backup we just did because the server's failed. So that's just gone and powered itself off. So now what we've got is, we've got these backup images. Where are we going to recover them to, and how quickly can we get that server back up? So on another machine on the network, and in this case, I'm on my HyperV server. It could be on my BDR. I'm going to click on VirtualBoot. Add image file, so we're going to go and locate the backups. Now, I've got the destinations pre-saved, so that enables me to spin this up quite quickly. And we're going to go down and select that backup, 1,737. That's the backup we just did. Select that, put in my encrypted password. Now, it's going to pull across all of the volumes that were in that job, so I don't need to retain the recovery volume here, but I need them. My system drive is the boot, as well as any data volumes that it would pull across. Click Next. Let's look at HyperV first. I know the webinar description did focus on HyperV, and we'll also take a look at vSphere. So obviously, I'll just put it in here. Webinar, 2 core, 2 gig of memory, automatically start the virtual machine after creating it. So I'll click Create. So obviously this VM was in Hyper-V. What you'll notice is that every time we do a virtual boot in this status bar here, we're actually going to see an option where it starts HIR patching, hardware independent restore. That is just ensuring that when the system starts booting, that it's got the appropriate drivers for wherever we're going, which in this case is Hyper-V, to ensure that Windows doesn't have any problem. We'll then connect to Hyper-V, create the VM, link it to the backup images, and start booting it. So this will take up to 60 seconds. The VM will get created. This here that I'm running is actually our latest SPX 6.7 release candidate. So over here, I'm actually running Hyper-V 2016. So this is one of the newer supported hypervisors with SPX 6.7. Again, it supports Windows 10 as well as Windows Server 2012 R2. So I can just see if we pop back to that wizard, it's now creating the virtual machine in Hyper-V. Within another couple of seconds, it will automatically start booting that. So by default, we haven't connected the network adapter. That means while it's booting, I can go and put it into a SAMPIT network, or I can bridge it straight back onto the network. So that's succeeded. We'll just minimize that, and this server is now booting. So as I mentioned, we won't have connected the network adapter. That allows you to deal with your networking, perhaps put it into an external switch, internal LAN. Obviously, if you bridge it back on the network, you don't want to do that if the production server's still running. But the cool thing is this can run while the production server's still running. So if we put it into a different network, there'll be no disruption. So very easy. Now, while that's running, let's go and do that again, but this time let's send the backup as well into vSphere. So this, to be fair, is probably going to slow my backup storage down a little bit because it's going to get hammered trying to boot it twice. But this is the process. So I can see there I've got one virtual boot running now. It's going to create another migration file to facilitate a second virtual boot. But this is just the cool thing with the solution, is it doesn't matter where we want to recover, what we need to do. So this, I'm actually going to send this into vSphere 6.5. So again, I've got the ability to leverage the latest hypervisors with this build. I need to log into my vSphere and log in here. So basically there's a couple more options here because I've got to tell vSphere where those backups are. So if we just give me a minute here, I need to go and browse to the SMB path that we're going to use. It's in there. Put in my credentials. Go next. I'm going to select an ESXi host. The first time you do this, it will inject a plugin, which it already has. I'm going to select a data store, configure the virtual machine, I'll call it webinar. 2 core, 2 gig of RAM, automatically start the virtual machine. And you'll see here with vSphere, we've got the option to migrate the data drive. We'll talk about that in a second. So basically, this is going to go through a very similar process. You'll see it do the HIR, inject the appropriate drivers. This VM we just backed up wasn't HyperV. We're sending it to vSphere, so it's going to need some different drivers to ensure we don't have an issue booting. Now, if I had ticked migrate the data drive, there was a couple of options. The first one was migrate before starting the machine, and that effectively will do a complete restore. So if that server was 2 terabytes of backup images, it's however long it takes to restore 2 terabytes across my network into that VM. But what I'm doing is with HyperV is I'm saying, look, just boot it straight away off the backup image, get me up and running. And with vSphere, while it's running, we can initiate a transparent backfill later. Now, there was an option in there for me to start that immediately after booting the machine. The problem is that would obviously initiate a lot of extra I/O while my users are trying to work as that backfill happens. So what I typically suggest is VirtualBoot. Right now it's the middle of the day, VirtualBoot, get the customer online, get my servers back up, and then perhaps at 5 o'clock, what we can do is just simply initiate a vSphere snapshot of the virtual machine, and that snapshot will automatically perform the transparent backfill. So you might as well let that run overnight. The server's still running, there's just a bit more I/O across the network and across the storage as it does the backfill. So that's really cool. It's just configuring the virtual machine and now starting it. So in the background here, if we take a look, HyperV is still booting. It's probably, to be fair, going a little bit slow considering I'm actually booting a second copy of it into vSphere. So, if we give it another sort of minute or two, we should see that it's booted up. But let's just jump into vSphere as well here. There's my webinar VM that we just created. Right click, open console. So as I mentioned, you simply right-click Initiate Snapshot would give me the ability to, transparently start that backfill as well. What's going on my screen here? Let's just try this again. Cool, there we go. So again, Windows is booting. So guys, I'll just leave this running. If anyone's got any questions, please type them in now. If we're still talking in a couple of minutes, we should see both of these logged in, and on the desktop, you'll see that file we created at 11:20 Sydney time. So that was actually only 8 minutes ago. I think we did that backup, and I'm now booting it into 2 different hypervisors. So really easy, fast disaster recovery, the ability to rapidly virtualize regardless of how big those backups are. If that server was 2 terabytes, we're booting it right now. The backfill process, we can deal with that later. We need to get up and running quickly. So that's the really cool thing. And what it does is it's obviously reading off a compressed image. So the initial boot time is going to be a bit slower than normal. However, it's writing the data into the virtual disk. So in VMware, into the data store HyperV, it's created a default, in the default HyperV machine folder, it's created a VHDX. So what that means is as it's reading and booting, it's writing into the VHDX. So if I then subsequently reboot the server, it's already got the stuff it needs to boot in that VHDX. As services load and people work, it's writing into the VHDX. So read from the backup image, write to the VHDX. That's how VirtualBoot gets its performance to run really well and become really effective. But it does, if my backup images were sitting on a USB drive or on a NAS running sort of Samba file sharing protocol, it's going to be quite slow. So that's where you really need to consider where the backups are going and ensuring you've got the functionality to perform this at a reasonable speed. So 11:30 now, so it's been 10 minutes. So in 10 minutes, I've done a complete backup and fully virtualized the server and got right back up to the desktop. At the same time, I'm also putting another copy of it into vSphere, which should be up in another minute. So no smoke and mirrors, guys. We've just done this live. It's that easy. It honestly is. So that's pretty much the end of my webinar. Again, I'll allow some time now. We are at half past the hour, so we have gone through our time. But I do have sort of 10 minutes free if anyone wants to ask any questions. I don't think anything's come through just yet. But guys, I've finished the webinar today. Thank you very much for your time. Again, if you've got any questions, I'm happy to talk some more on any particular query or on any more detail. But yeah, I'll leave this this vSphere VirtualBoot. There's probably, let's see here, maybe I'll go power off this HyperV one. I can actually see here in the background the vSphere one's now booting up as well. But this we've migrated this server. That could have been a physical box, and within minutes we've now completely migrated it into vSphere. Obviously the backfill would still have to happen, but we can cut over quickly. If I was doing some sort of migration to VMware, the cool thing is you can actually test this before committing to it. So we could do a test now, and then at 5 o'clock, well, I'll do a test now, and if it's all good at 5 o'clock, do a final backup of my original server, shut it down, VirtualBoot it into here, and away I go. If there's any problem, because it's off the backup, we can just power up the original server again, and you've always got that fallback position, which is pretty cool as well. But there's that backup we did at 11:20 a.m. on the desktop. It's now 11 minutes later, and we've fully backed up and recovered into a different hypervisor. So pretty cool, real world, rapid virtualization and disaster recovery. So guys, I don't think any questions have come through. We'll probably just leave it at that. I'll give you another sort of 20-30 seconds in case anyone does have any queries. But again, thanks for your time. Appreciate you jumping on this webinar today. I will add that I have recorded the webinar, so you'll all get an email with a link to view the webinar. Additionally, we have a YouTube channel here. So StorageCraft APAC is our YouTube channel. If you scroll down to StorageCraft webinar series, I uploaded my one yesterday on protecting your backups from ransomware. So you can go in there and I'll have this one uploaded later today. Additionally, up the top here under StorageCraft Solutions by Karl Thomson, that's me. There's a lot of webinars here. There's one on using our latest SPX interface. There's ones here on replicating to S3. There's ones here on Image Manager Advanced Verification with HyperV, so that's leveraging the VirtualBoot. There's VirtualBoot for vSphere in here. There's VirtualBoot for HyperV. So there's a lot of, quick tutorials that range from anywhere from a couple of minutes up to half an hour that take you through each of our functions in our software. So, if there's anything you want to see, take your time to browse through the YouTube channel. But again, doesn't look like any questions have come through, so I think we'll leave it at that for today. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending.